Dude, J.J. Watt is a first-team All-Pro defensive end every single time he plays a full season in the NFL, except for his rookie season, of course. But after that, every single full year he's played, he's been regarded as the best player at his position every single year. I think that's more than being elite. If every single year you play, you're the best at your position every single year, hands down. And the fact that he's only played, what, 6 full seasons, and he already has 3 Player of the Year awards. I mean, what else can I say? J.J. Watt is more than elite. He is a defensive GOAT. And when I look back to the 2010s, even though he missed like 3 seasons, J.J. Watt was probably, along with Aaron Donald, the most dominant defensive player of this era. I'm going to be completely real with this. How you guys doing? It is Monday, July 20th, 2020 out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims. And for this episode of The Elite, I was going to do a profile on J.J. Watt. And because his individual seasons are so rare and so legendary, I think I have to put him in Mike Trout category and GOAT him for how amazing his individual seasons are. Because despite the fact that he hasn't played that many seasons, he could still go to the Hall of Fame right now with the seasons that he had, and he would make it in the Hall. No doubt in my mind. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background on J.J. Watt, and if you're not familiar with him, J.J. Watt is a 31-year-old defensive end who currently plays for the Houston Texans. He is 6'5", 285 pounds. Don't get fooled by that. This dude is incredibly big, but he's so fast, and he's one of the strongest players in the NFL. He's just so physically overpowering, and you can tell that he works so hard to keep himself in shape like that. And without further ado, I'm just going to get into J.J. Watt. So, of course, he's comes from a football family. Coming up in Wisconsin, he was initially recruited to go play at Central Michigan to be a tight end. He initially transferred to Wisconsin, where he was a walk-on player, and as a defensive lineman, he finished with 15 and a half tackles for losses, 44 total losses in 13 games for Wisconsin, finished with 4.5 sacks that season, and he started to be recognized as a good young player. And then his second year in Wisconsin, his final year, his junior year, he would start all 13 games for Wisconsin, and he would finish with 62 total tackles, 21 of which for loss, 7 sacks, 1 interception, as the Wisconsin Badgers finished the 2010 season, winning the Big Ten, but they lost the Rose Bowl to the TCU Horned Frogs. They were still a ranked team. Wisconsin was a team that was on the radar, and the teams were able to see J.J. Watt really kind of dominate after transferring schools and switching sides of the football to play on. J.J. Watt was then drafted 11th in the 2011 draft after being given the Lott Trophy and being named a first-team All-Big Ten selection. He was a first-team All-American that year. He would go on to get drafted by the Houston Texans in 2011, and his first season would be kind of just starting where he left off. He would start 16 games in the 2011 season, where the Houston Texans finished first in the AFC South. They finished 10-6. That year, J.J. Watt would finish with 4 passes defended. He finished with 56 combined tackles, 13 for loss. He had 5.5 sacks on the season. No rookie honors, but I mean, he was still growing into one of the league's best players. And the next year, the league wouldn't even know what hit him. In 2012, J.J. Watt's age 23 season. It's like we're already past his rookie year. Now we are when he starts dominating. Yet before then, he's just a rookie. He's a good young player who was taken with the 11th pick in the draft after being one of the Big Ten's best young D linemen. Fast forward to his second year in the league in 2012, Houston Texans finished that season first in the AFC South, finishing 12-4. J.J. Watt would go on to not only be a Pro Bowler, but he would be named the Defensive Player of the Year in his second year in the league, finishing with 16 passes defended, 4 forced fumbles, 20.5 sacks on the season, 39 tackles for losses, leading the league in sacks and tackles for losses in his second year in the league. He was named first team All-Pro. Not much more to add to it. J.J. Watt was named the best young player of the season, and like I said, he was named the defensive player of the year in his second year in the league. That's something legendary. Very few players can flex that, and sometimes they rarely replicate it. Going into the 2013 season, J.J. Watt would start all 16 games as the Houston Texans finished with a 2-14 season that year. But J.J. Watt would still start all 16 games with 7 passes defended. He finished with 4 forced fumbles, finishing with 10.7.5 sacks on the season, with 80 combined tackles, 22 for loss. And he would be named the first team All-Pro, and he would be named a Pro Bowler for the second time in his career in his first 3 seasons in the league. Just continuing on the trend, in his 2014 season, in his age 25 season, he would start all 16 games for the Houston Texans as they finished out 9-7, in the AFC South. And J.J. Watt will win the Defensive Player of the Year for the second time in 3 years. In this season, he would finish with a pick 6, by the way. He'd have 4 forced fumbles, one of which would be returned by him for a touchdown. He had 5 fumble recoveries on the year. He had 20.5 sacks for the second time in his career, but he didn't lead the league in sacks that year. He had 78 combined tackles on the season. He led the league in tackles for loss with 29 for the second time in a year, for the second time in his career. The Houston Texans would then not even go into the playoffs, but J.J. Watt would be named the Defensive Player of the Year in 2 of his first 4 years in the league. Do you not understand how overpowering J.J. Watt is? In 2015, in his age 26 season, after being named a first-team All-Pro defensive end for 3 consecutive years, he would start all 16 games, no interceptions, sadly. He'd defend 8 passes. He would end with 3 forced fumbles on the season. He would lead the league in sacks with 17.5. This is the second time he'd lead the league in sacks for his career. He would combine to finish with 76 sacks on the season. He finished with 29 tackles for loss on the season as well. He would go on to be named the Defensive Player of the Year for the second year in a row, for the third time in a 4-year span after being the sacks leader for the second time. In addition, he was still a 4-time Pro Bowler. After his first 5 years in the league, after his age 26 season, J.J. Watt went from being a tight end at Central Michigan to being a walk-on defensive lineman at Wisconsin, to being a highly recruited defensive end out of Wisconsin. The very next year, he'd be a good level pro on the Houston Texans. The next year, he'd end up being a Defensive Player of the Year in his second year. The next year, he'd still continue being a first-team All-Pro. He dropped down to 10.5 sacks. He still had 4 forced fumbles on the season. The very next year, he was Defensive Player of the Year with 20.5 sacks on the season. And the year after that, he won the Defensive Player of the Year for the third time in 4 years. That's J.J. Watt's career up until age 27. And at that point, I think that's when he's GOATed. He has no reason to come back. And at that point, if you retire with that as your first 5 seasons in the league, you're still going to make the Hall of Fame first ballot. I have no reason to doubt. But following that, J.J. Watt would be bitten by the injury bug. His next season in 2016, he'd only played 3 games, and he'd only finish up with 1.5 sacks on the season. The Houston Texans in 2016 would end up finishing 9-7 as they recently got Deshaun Watson, but they were playing without J.J. Watt. In 2017, they go 4-12 and completely miss J.J. Watt as he only plays 5 of the games of that season. He finishes with no sacks in the season. But in 2018, J.J. Watt was able to give you a full season performance that he hadn't been able to give since 2015. And in the 16 games that he played, he would help the Texans in their season when they would finish 11-5, the best record they'd have since 2012, since J.J. Watt won his first Defensive Player of the Year. Their best record under Deshaun Watson. He would finish with 7 forced fumbles on the season. He had 16 sacks, 61 combined tackles, and 18 of them for loss. He would be a Pro Bowler for the 5th time, and he would be named a first-team All-Defender. What else? What more is there to ask out of your defensive end? And that was the last full season he played in his career. In 2019, he started 8 games that season, finishing with 4 sacks, with 24 tackles on the season, but he never finished out the season because he was still riddled with injury. So when you're J.J. Watt, you're looking back on your career, and right now he is a 31-year-old defensive end who has currently been in the league for 9 seasons. His first year, he's missed 3 seasons due to injury. And out of the other 6, one of them he was a rookie. The other 5, he was a first team all pro defensive end, which is incredibly wild. He's led the league in forced fumbles once. He's led the league in sacks twice. He's topped 20 sacks twice, and those two are not completely interrelated. He's topped over 80, he's topped over 70 tackles 4 times in his career as a defensive end, which he shouldn't be able to do. He's topped 20 tackles for loss 4 times in his career, 3 of which he led the league in tackles for loss. He had 39 in his second year in the league. J.J. Watt was that overpowering and that dominant. But he's been on the Houston Texans this entire time. He's decided to live everything out there. He was the Walter Payton Man of the Year in 2017. In addition to not really playing much that year, he was helping out, especially with everything that was going on with the hurricane at that time. And currently, if you're looking at the Houston Texans team, they're looking like a very strong team. They're definitely the strongest team in the AFC South, if you ask me. Their defense is kind of questionable, but they always will have J.J. Watt, which will help them out of a lot, especially if you can put it down to one position. I still think J.J. Watt is an elite player, considering the last full season he played. The last 5 full seasons he played, he showed he was the best, arguably the best player, the best defensive player in all of football. Additionally, just in the games that he plays, you can show that you can see how he impacts this team. And within the seasons that he's played, he's shown that he can be the best player, one of the best defensive players of this era. I can imagine that he would go on for a very long time, because I would assume he's in very, very good shape. I hope he keeps his body in good shape as well, because I wouldn't want him to break his body over the NFL. But I will say that I've appreciated watching J.J. Watt's career grow from what it is, from where it started to where it is now. I've been really, really glad to watch the journey. And even though people may say he's fallen off, he's just been hurt the last season. Just don't catch J.J. Watt slipping. And as of right now, I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer if he stops right now. To me, I think he's more than elite. I think he's a GOAT level defensive player. And I think he is the only player to me that should go along Aaron Donald as defensive players in the NFL GOAT list. Those are the 2 players that I would feel are the 2 most dominating defensive presences. And I would include Luke Kuechly if Luke Kuechly was still playing, but he's not. And with that said, I appreciate you for listening to all 12 minutes. If you ever get a chance, peep my boy J.J. Watt. He wears number 99. And when he's not on, CBS, he has his own show with playing tag with his brothers, professional tag. But when he's not on that, he's wearing 99 for the Houston Texans. When you get a chance to watch him, if you watch a full game of J.J. Watt and the Texans, you'll see something. You will see a lot of things, but you'll see J.J. Watt just completely wreck an offensive line. And I think you really enjoy it, because J.J. Watt, that's why he's there. That's why he's getting paid all that money. And he consistently shows that when he comes in and puts in a full season, everyone will know J.J. Watt was there. Who's to say that there's not another defensive player of the year or even an MVP season that can come from J.J. Watt? There's no point of going with the hypotheticals, but as of right now, I really enjoy watching J.J. Watt, and I consider him a GOAT level player, especially at this point. He could drop it all right now. And with that, I think I've said my piece. I appreciate you for listening out, for hearing me out. Peace out.